Hello and welcome back to Shock's Talks. I'm Shakti, and today we are beginning season 3, which I'm calling Contact, Abduction, and the Experiencer. So if you're new to this channel, welcome. Thanks for checking it out. All kinds of great playlists and recaps for you if you're just catching up. For everyone that's been here the whole time, thank you so much. I'm not going to do the whole opening spiel right now. I'm just going to say that this is really exciting because we've kind of laid the groundwork for this season by going over the history and going over the psi phenomena and the various theories of the natures of reality, nature, whatever, you know what I mean? So we're digging into like this kind of darker slash weirder side of things, which is the abduction stories, people's stories of contact, and what some people today have termed the experiencer, or the experiencer group, people that have experienced anomalous phenomena of all kinds. Check out these really cute earrings that a friend gave me. I'm rocking these little UFOs that are kind of like abducting something or someone in a beam of sparkling light right here. It's just another cute gift, and thank you so much. So today I want to talk a little bit about Lou Elizondo because he's kind of the current event in UAP UFO world news right now. He is a former Pentagon official, obviously US, and he released a book called Imminent, and this book has created quite a stir. So Lou is doing a lot of different interviews right now, and I've been listening to a lot of them. And the last one that I checked out was on this podcast called Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimungal. And this podcast is excellent. You can check it out on YouTube or other podcast platforms. And the questions that he gets into with Lou were very revealing, because what it seemed like when this book first came out was that there was almost like this air of like danger, the word imminent, imminent threat maybe, or something bad about to happen. And a lot of people were kind of saying that Lou is fear mongering, and this is all part of, maybe some other kind of agenda. Anyway, people always have a million different takes on what's going on here, but all I can really give you is my take, because this is Shock Talks. So my take is that Lou he's either completely genuine or he's playing the role of this character, which feels like a real character in the world of UAP research. So either way, what he's presenting is information that we've all heard before. Everyone who's been studying this stuff, nothing he's saying is anything new. I do tend to think that he is genuine and that he is a very smart man, and he was exposed to a lot of stuff that he just didn't know about before he started this work of looking into the phenomena for his job. And he, because of his role and his role being in national security, he makes it really clear in this interview that his brain is identifying this as a threat because that's his job. So he tells this little story. He says, imagine that your house, is in a safe neighborhood, but you lock your doors anyway, and sometimes you even lock your windows, and one night you go to sleep and everything is peaceful and quiet, but when you wake up in the morning, you see these unexpected boot prints in the living room covered in mud, and they're size 11 boots. And what do you think of that? Would you consider that a threat? Nothing bad has happened. Nothing else was disturbed in the house. You were unharmed, but these boot prints were there. And it's a really, it's just a little story, but it's a good story because it kind of gets you thinking about violations in general. He talks about how when it comes to the experiencer stories around their interactions with aliens and abductions, there's a couple things going on that we would consider bad, you know, taking someone against their will in the middle of the night, touching them without permission, maybe performing tests on them. You know, he calls it kidnapping and assault. So he's just making the distinction that, like, identifying this whole thing as a threat is basically his whole job. And he said when he puts on his own hat, like his Lou hat and not his job hat, he kind of says that it's not necessarily, I'm trying to find exactly the note that I took on this part of it. Let me see if I can find it. Basically it just wasn't as scary, it seemed like. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah. He said when he's just thinking of it like for himself, he's not sure if he would consider it a threat. But in the role that he is tasked with, he identifies it as a threat. And he also says that from a national security perspective, they're trying to assess capabilities and intent. So they're beginning to understand the capabilities based on the behavioral patterns of the UAP. And there's a ton of data, and there's just so much information that they have about those capabilities, and the capabilities are beyond anything that we have. So that's one component of assessing this as a threat. There's this presence here in our world, and it's more capable than us. The tech is more advanced, okay? And then in terms of the intent, you know, there's more questions when it comes to this. Nobody really knows what the intent is, but when you look at the research that has been done around contact and abduction, you can start to make some educated guesses about what the intent might be based on the types of interactions that people are having with these beings. And that's what we're going to get into today with David Jacobs. And before we leave Lou, I just wanted to share a couple of other things from this interview. Um, so he does talk a lot about like the ancient reports of anomalous phenomena and how that does indicate that there has been some kind of presence here on Earth throughout history. But later on, we're going to hear from Richard Dolan, and his perspective is that maybe that's true, but what does it matter if they are different groups over time? So what Dolan is starting to say is that the recent history, the last 80 years, 100 years, has a very specific kind of activity, a specific kind of being, multiple beings, but certain categories of beings that are being seen by these people. Like the Greys, for example, this little alien light is back on today because we're talking about the Greys a lot. The Greys are an alleged alien race that is constantly seen when people are having abduction experiences, and we're going to get into the breakdown of the hierarchy of beings according to Jacobs based on his research later today. But in ancient sightings, a lot of times people are reporting more like almost angelic beings or powerful humanoid-like beings. They are reporting things flying in the sky. They're reporting these Roman soldiers were talking about Eclipus, these sort of flaming shields that were flying around and following them on the battlefield. You have all these different religious sightings, as we've discussed in relationship to Diana Walsh-Pasulka's work, and all kinds of orbs in Indian traditions and ancient texts. You have vimanas, these flying vehicles. So there's a lot out there to suggest that people have been having these experiences for a long time, but what's been going on in the very recent past, the last 100 years, is pretty specific. And Dolan makes the point that there's just a huge difference between the last 1,000 years, even in the last 100 years, because you have this evolution of human technology. And we're on the cusp of this huge collective power as a result of our knowledge of science and our advancements in technology. So the fact that we are making leaps and bounds kind of right now in our history, and that correlates with a very specific type of being coming here, interacting with us, and potentially messing with us a little bit. We're, doing some sampling of our DNA, maybe taking eggs and sperm, maybe creating hybrid human and non-human beings, things like that. I guess what they're all trying to say is like, this looks like an agenda. It doesn't look just like a random sampling, a random scientific study or observation of the people of Earth. Okay, so that's kind of where we're headed today. And let's see, check my notes again. Oh, another thing I thought was really cool that Lou Elizondo was saying was that disclosure is a process and not an event. So sometimes when people hear the word disclosure, they think it means that one day we're all just going to know the truth, we're going to know everything, and the truth will come out, and that's disclosure. But we all know, anyone who's been studying this for a while now, that that's just probably never going to happen. But what is happening is this lengthy conversation. And he said disclosure also takes time and sensitization. So that was a really interesting point. And he compared it to like jumping into the cold water and how that can shock the system. But if you dip a toe in and start acclimating, you can slowly get your whole body in. So basically, what we're dealing with right now is this whole topic, because it's been so covered up for so many years, and it's just completely shrouded in secrecy and confusion, and there's misinformation and disinformation, and there's so many different layers to this thing. So when people are introduced to this subject, there's often a kind of a shock that happens, a shutting down, a resistance to the information. People are embarrassed by even considering this possibility because there's not enough evidence and facts to prove it one way or the other. So they get very flustered and emotional. And what this subject actually requires is a very long-term, careful consideration, and a very open-minded and skeptical approach. It also requires a lot of contextual information, as you take in little bits and pieces of the UFO history and the phenomena that people are experiencing that relates to it. You also have to take into account what's going on in the world, during these experiences, and religious perspectives and cultural backgrounds and all kinds of other things. So it requires a lot of nuanced thinking and patience, and I guess just really a lot of open-mindedness, so good on us for at least thinking about these things. Now, I know a lot of people think, why does it even matter? None of this really matters to me. I don't really care. That's fine. It might not be relevant to everyone. I think the reason that people get into this is because, well, there's a number of reasons, but these are the ones that I see most often. There are people who have had anomalous experiences that are hard to explain, and they're looking for answers, and they're looking for deeper layers of truth. And so they come to this topic seeking that understanding, that deeper understanding. And there are people who have been traumatized by the experiences that they've gone through, so they're seeking community. There are people who are disillusioned with the government, so they are very interested in the things that the government is lying about and hiding, so they're curious about that. And then there are these people who are actually, it's their job to consider things like national security or just larger global issues, and so they come to it for that reason. There's all kinds of military people who have had sightings, and they get drawn into this. They want to know everything there is to know because They saw things firsthand, and they were kind of told to keep it a secret in a lot of cases. So I am here because I find it fascinating. I have a lot of anomalous experiences of my own. I feel that searching for answers makes life more interesting and exciting. And I'm also okay with never knowing, because it's very possible that we will never know everything there is to know about all of this. But the journey of learning about it opens up a lot of interesting pathways and connections, and y'all know, you know why we're here. We're here because it's interesting. So, anyway, that's some preamble. Let's talk about David Jacobs. So, this is the book, Walking Among Us, and the subtitle, I guess you call it, is The Alien Plan to Control Humanity, which sounds pretty daunting. But what's funny is this book, it's almost goofy, and I'm going to tell you why once we get into it. Not because I think that he's full of you know what. I think he's onto something here, and the people that he's talking to might be genuine experiencers. There's a very good chance that they are. But it's funny, these alien beings, they don't seem as scary as I once thought, based on like the alien plan to control humanity, you know? So we're going to get into this, but first let's hear a little bit about David Jacobs. So he's 82 now. David Michael Jacobs, born August 10th, 1942, and it's 2024 right now for anyone who's watching this in the future. So he's an American historian and retired associate professor of history at Temple University, specializing in 20th century American history. Jacobs is a prominent figure in ufology and the study of the alien abduction phenomena, including the use of hypnosis on subjects claiming to be abductees. Jacobs has authored several books on the subject, and what was I going to say? Basically, we're going to learn a little bit about what this hypnosis is all about, and I think this is really interesting because I listened to an interview with him while I was preparing for this episode, and I learned a lot from that because I had a lot of questions about just the hypnosis in general, but a little more about his career. By the way, this is just from Wikipedia, this little biographical information, in case anyone is wondering. He obtained his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1973 in the field of intellectual history. He wrote his dissertation on the controversy over unidentified flying objects in America. A revised edition of his dissertation was published as the UFO Controversy in America by Indiana University Press in 1975. As a faculty member of the Department of History at Temple University, Jacobs specialized in history of 20th century American popular culture. He stated that his current research interests involve a delineation of the role of anomalous experiences in personal and cultural life. For over 25 years, Jacobs taught a course on UFOs in American society. So, interesting. He's obviously an educated man, and in this interview, which I linked below, this interview was from 2017, and it's called The Alien Agenda with Ron James, Bigger Questions. It's a YouTube video. So I learned that Jacobs got involved in UFO studies in the 60s, and I think I've mentioned this before, but he worked with Bud Hopkins. So Bud Hopkins is a famous abduction researcher who was, I think, one of the first to start doing this work, at least in the United States. And I got his book Abduction, so I might read that next, or I might do one really positive take on this and then read Abduction, because I want to go back and forth in this season. There's a lot of different things that people think about what these aliens are up to, so we're going to kind of jump around and look at various theories. But anyway, Jacobs sat with Bud Hopkins for 4 years. This is how he learned to do this very specific type of hypnotic regression work. And he said he was just watching and learning, and then he started his own practice in 1986. So, a couple of interesting things about hypnosis. I've always felt a little skeptical of it myself. I was thinking, I just don't believe that it's this magical thing that can like really put people under and then they forget what happened. And the more people that I've heard talk about it, the more I'm beginning to understand that it's not. It's not actually that magical. It's really not even more mysterious than a guided meditation. And Jacobs confirms that in this interview. He says, hypnosis is not totally fraudulent, but it's close to it. Basically, it's just relaxation. And if they don't want to, like, they're not going to. If they do, it's because they are choosing to uncover memories. So your free will is still happening. We've all heard about these stories of like people going up on stage and the hypnotist makes them all act like a chicken or whatever. I remember at one of my during like college, or not college, it was high school graduation. Leading up to the graduation, there were all these events and in those final weeks of school, and one of them was this hypnosis show. And I remember thinking like, this sounds really fun and cool, like I want to try it, like I want to be hypnotized. And I didn't feel any different. I felt like, why is everyone doing all this crazy stuff? But I just decided to like do the things they were doing so that I wouldn't ruin the show for everyone. And it was just like, oh, you're acting like a toddler now, or you're doing this or that. And I just thought it was really silly. And then afterwards, I was just like, that's weird. And I felt like for the rest of my life, like, I can't be hypnotized. There's no way that that could ever work on me. But then I heard other people talking about that same experience and being like, wow, it was so crazy. Like, I really just like felt like I was in a dream or something. And I just felt like I had to do the things. And I'm thinking that's the power of our own mind, and that's the power of suggestion. So basically, if you ever decide to undergo hypnosis, it's good to know that it's really you choosing to go along for this journey. And what Jacobs talks about is that hypnosis it doesn't even matter. That word doesn't even matter. What's really going on here is a process of questioning. And it's the crafting of these questions that lead people to the truth of their own experience. So it leads them to remembering. And he talks about how it's almost like, especially when we go through traumatic experiences, and he doesn't claim to know exactly what's going on. He's like, nobody knows. We don't really know what's going on here, but there does seem to be some kind of suppression element with the experiences and the aliens, or whatever you want to call them, kind of causing people to forget or suggesting that they will forget, and that works most of the time. But he does say that there's a kind of a step-by-step process that you can take someone through to bring those memories back. And that's what he's doing in his work. And so I thought that was really interesting. And he makes the point that these abductions, they're categorized by the secretive nature. They're clandestine. They're meant to be secret. The aliens that are conducting this research or these abductions in these specific cases are not trying to get a message out. They're not trying to have a conversation openly. They're trying to do something that's secret, and they're hoping that people will not talk about it. So that's like an important quality of the experience. And he claims that that's because they don't want us to know what they're doing. And he said 95% of abductees do not know that they are abductees. Now, you might be wondering, like, how many people has he actually worked with? Well, in this interview, which was 2017, he said it was only 150 people, which kind of is a lot, but also like isn't really that many people, 150 people who he worked really closely with. He did not charge people for this work. He allowed people to come seek him out, based on just knowing that these experiences are so unique and these people need help and support and some kind of sort of counseling. And in exchange, he was able to have that work, have those transcripts for his work, for his books. And he said he even ended up spending money getting all of these recordings transcribed. So it's not like he was making money off of this, off of these interviews with people. He was genuinely interested because he felt like it was an important subject to research. And he would give everyone like 3 to 4 hours at least when they started there, and they're free to stop sessions at any time. He's like, it's their life, it's not mine, you know, this, it doesn't matter to me if they want to come or not. But some people he ended up working with like over the course of many years. So this isn't like a one-time thing. There's a process here that involves multiple sessions because there are these moments where people misremember or something is too scary and then it takes a while to get to it. So a lot of this work happened over like, you know, 40 or more sessions maybe, and sometimes went on for years with certain people. So that was pretty interesting. And he said, and this reminds me of like what Lou was saying at the beginning about capabilities and intent. He said, we cannot learn intent by looking at UFO sightings. We need to look at what's going on inside, basically, to learn the intent. So that's what his research is about. And that's what a lot of these other abduction researchers are interested in, is like, what more can we learn from the people that have been inside, the people that are interacting with these beings? And this is an important part of this research, and I think we can probably do even better at this as time goes on. You know, these people that started it were kind of just out there on their own trying to get this thing going, and they've done a lot, but I think there's a lot more we can do. And hopefully, as this topic becomes more legitimate through things like the congressional hearings, we might see more just more intelligent people who are in the medical fields, in the fields of like psychology and other types of therapies joining this effort, and not only trying to understand what the meaning is behind these experiences that people are claiming to have had, but perhaps even analyzing the patterns that are being reported in a more in-depth way. So he said, this is interesting. He said, neither I nor Bud Hopkins have ever heard anything positive. Now, that's pretty extreme. You know, you would think based on all the contactees that are out there, there's a range of positive to negative experiences, but in his work and Bud's work, they were not hearing positive stories. So that doesn't mean really anything. But it is kind of interesting. It just means that maybe he was attracting a certain kind of experiencer that knew to go to him based on what other people had told them, or they knew of his reputation, or maybe it means that the majority of these experiences are not positive, but it's really hard to say. You know, I can't really conclude anything from that statement, but it was interesting to hear, because both of these men have done a lot of work with abductees. And I'm going to go ahead and show you some stuff from the book here. So let me read a couple things from Walking Among Us, page 15 first. Okay. This is from chapter 2, Abductees, Aliens, and the Program. Over the years, many people have attempted to define the abduction phenomena, but the phenomenon has yielded itself to analysis only slowly. Most definitions are inaccurate because they fail to incorporate new information accrued over the years. We now know that abductees need not be physically kidnapped. They need not necessarily be subjected to examination-type procedures, and they need not be taken on board a UFO. So perhaps a correct definition of the phenomenon is an alien-initiated interaction with a human during which the alien controls a human, both physically and cognitively, in real time and in any location. So let's talk about this control aspect. He calls it neurological control. A lot of the experiences that people report involve an aspect of control, mental control. And it's weird, you know, like it's hard to imagine because we don't really have a lot of that going on in our own society as far as I know, like a direct mental ability to kind of get inside your head and influence you or stop you from moving your limbs or put certain thoughts or images into your mind. But later in this book, he does talk about how some abductees had started to be trained in these techniques, especially the ones that had a lot of contact with hybrids. So this is fascinating. Here is another quote from the book. Some researchers prefer to use the nondescript word experiencer, but this term sidesteps the lifelong psychological trauma and physical events that most abductees endure. Experiencer simply imputes neutrality, passivity, and even pleasantness to the phenomenon. As one abductee said, the word experiencer is all pink and fluffy. So this is interesting because there is a lot of interest in bringing back this experiencer term today. There's a lot of people who are embracing that. And the reason that I think they're embracing it now is because they want to include other anomalous phenomena and not just their experiences with aliens. So many people who are experiencers also happen to have, maybe they have telepathic experiences with other people. Maybe they have ghost experiences or poltergeist experiences. Maybe they see other things that aren't just aliens, or they have time dilation or missing time, or they have precognitive abilities or things like that. So, experiencer is popular right now. And at the same time, there's a whole group of people out there who have had really negative abduction experiences who feel a little bit put off by that term. And it's a good thing for us to think about language and how important language is. Actually, Richard Dolan talked about this essay by George Orwell, and it's called Politics in the English Language. And Dolan always talks a lot about how different words carry these connotations that we all just kind of take for granted in a way. And I love when he lectures about this because I find it fascinating. So it just reminds me of this, how important the words are, the meanings of the words, and for us to really take our time and consider all these different terms and the way people use terms. Recently, Dolan brought up the word narrative and how it's so popular for people to say, like, oh, such and such, that's their narrative, or that's the narrative around that thing. And how it's kind of, in a way, it's already imposing a suggested like meaning into the listener's mind, because it's not like using a word like, well, that's that person's perspective, or that's their opinion, or that's what they've learned based on their research. You know, it's like it's saying they're telling a story. It's kind of adding that little extra meaning of like they're telling a story, and therefore there's like some falseness in it, or it's a little skewed. um anyway, I just think it's really interesting and important to consider the very complex meanings and sort of like the intentions behind the words that we use. So let's see. What was the next thing I wanted to talk about? Okay, so here's a little section about this Roper poll. I don't know a whole lot about it, but in the book, David Jacobs says that in 1991, Bud Hopkins, sociologist Ron Westrom, and I worked with the Roper organization to determine how many people have had abduction-like experiences. So this goes beyond the 150 people that he worked with. Roper interviewed 5,986 randomly selected people across the United States. The poll, with an error rate of 1.4%, indicated that at minimum, 2%, which is 6 million Americans, have had experiences with abduction-like characteristics. 2%. So, and also that number reflects an exceptionally conservative analysis of the poll. Of course, to verify these numbers, we would have to investigate each case. However, tens of thousands of people have contacted me and my colleagues detailing their abduction experiences, and each one of them likely represents many more who have not contacted a researcher. Given that the abduction phenomenon is global and people around the world describe similar abduction events, the number of abductees is obviously extremely large. So again, we can't take any of these numbers too seriously, but we could be doing a better job of getting more data and more accurate data, I think, when it comes to this. So he talks more about the neural engagement and just these powerful capabilities of these alien beings and what they do when they take people. And then he talks about the alien spectrum. So now we're going to talk about the types of aliens that are most often reported in the experiences that he is researching. So we have at the top of the hierarchy what they call insectolins. Praying mantis-like, 6 feet tall, thin body, very strong neural engagement. They only communicate telepathically. Vaguely triangular hairless head, large black almond-shaped eyes, nose, ear holes, or mouth rarely reported, no chin, gender unknown, no apparent humanoid musculature. The function and the role of these, according to the experiences, are to oversee abduction operations. They seem to be the ones in command. Sometimes conduct preliminary examinations on abductees. Some of them wear robes with an extremely high collar. And they can engage in some substantive conversations, but those are telepathic. And so there's like a lot of notes about what we can guess about the biology of these things. Like there's no apparent humanoid heart or lung system. There's no identifiable reproductive or waste removal organs, and there's no way to know what their food intake is or how they are sustaining themselves. There is some information about that with some of the other beings, according to these reports. So then you have the small grays. These are your classic 3 to 3.5 foot tall, thin, little large head, big eye, gray aliens. They have very strong neural engagement abilities. They have a slit for a mouth, but it's non-functioning, nose and ear holes, pointed chin, no reproductive or waste removal organs. Again, no muscles, no circulatory system. When they're cut, a clear liquid comes out of the wound. No gender identification, and no known food intake other than the skin absorption of liquid nutrients. There was one story where an abductee kind of ran down a hall on one of these ships and saw these little grays coming out of these tanks where they sort of lifted, they were leaned back and then they lifted up and this liquid drained out of the tank and then they got out. So who knows what that's about. But anyway, these are the helpers. They abduct humans and take them on board UFOs. They help the abductees take off and put on their clothes, and they escort abductees around UFOs for scheduled procedures. They perform menial functions like cleaning human urine or vomit up. The tall grays are 4 to 4.5 feet tall and thin, strong neural engagement, only telepathic communication again. Similar to the grays, but they're just taller and they perform more complex procedures like the egg and sperm harvesting, embryo implantation, and fetal extraction. And they abduct humans and take them on board UFOs. Same body stuff, pretty much just the same description as the grays, but taller. And then another type of being seen on these ships, and we've talked about this in another episode too, but we're just going over it again. The reptilian, he calls them reptilins. a lot of people call them reptilians, or reptilian hybrids. So these are 5 to 6 feet tall, snake-like head, varied descriptions, scaly or mottled skin, neural engagement strength unknown. They only communicate telepathically. The eyes are described as cat-like and more humanoid. They're not fully black. And they have, well, nose and ear holes are rarely reported. There is a mouth, no apparent heart or lungs, no identifiable reproductive organs or waste removal organs, unknown gender, assumed male, and then energy or food source is unknown. And these perform more complex physical procedures and question abductees about events in their lives. Then we're going to just go through the different categories of hybrids that he has categorized. So these are all human alien combinations, basically. So humanoid hybrids, there's early stage, middle stage, late stage, and then human stage. So these, I'm not going to read the full description for all of these, but they're all kind of like gray alien human hybrids, and they also communicate telepathically, but as they get later more towards human, they also communicate verbally. So these are like the caretakers for the hybrid babies and toddlers. They perform procedures on humans. They help the small grays process abductees on board. They escort abductees around the UFO. They tend to be more communicative than grays or the early stage humanoids. They may develop special relationships with abductees, often attaching themselves to female abductees from an early age as personal project hybrids. This is for the late stage hybrids. And then we'll tell you more about that. These human abductees end up helping train these hybrids according to these reports that people are remembering from their experiences. And there are also security hybrids. They protect the Hubrids, which are the most humanoid of all the hybrids, according to this categorization. And they make sure that there are no security breaches. And then there's the humanoid hybrids. They look almost like totally like humans, and they help to train abductees for future tasks. They sometimes live on Earth. They bring hybrids down to Earth for like integration and learning, and sometimes they live in apartments apparently, and they take care of them, and they're trying to learn how to be more human. So there's a lot of details about all these different groups that he's outlined, or his categorization of these groups, but that's the basic situation. And then, so this whole book, basically what it's about is something called the change. So for a long time in his research, people had talked about the change, and then the deeper in he got, he started asking more and more questions, and it seems like basically the change is like this hybridization program, and more of these hybrids being implanted into human society. And this whole book is about, it has a lot of transcripts from the sessions, so you get to hear a lot. It's kind of boring actually. Like it's interesting, but you get into all these little details of these trainings that are happening where the human abductees are brought on board, and they have to go to a room and they have to talk to these hybrids, and the hybrids are like, this is going to sound really rude, but they're kind of just dumb. Like they just don't know anything about anything. And so they're constantly asking questions. There's a lot of, they call them question cascades. And because they're partially telepathic or fully telepathic, as soon as they ask questions of the human, the answer just kind of flashes into that human's mind, and they're kind of like extracting that information. So it's very draining and exhausting for the abductees. And the question cascades can be so mundane and so random, like, you know, somebody was having a dance lesson and then they don't know what music is, and they're like, why would anyone do music, and who appoints someone to be the person that makes music, and how do they get that job? And the human's like, oh, they just like want to do it, and that's why they do it. And they're like, I don't understand, why would anyone just do that? You know, they're, it sounds like they're very like robotic almost. There's a whole serve the leader mentality in these groups, and it's very much about the having a role and a job, and like serving the collective, and not really having any kind of um what do you call it, preferences. They don't really understand preferences, and they don't understand love. Like, they don't understand a lot of the cultural things that are going on in human culture. And so there's a lot of instances where these abductees are reporting going on these craft, and doing these little lessons, teaching people. They have these like simulated dining halls where they're trying to teach them how kids eat in school, but they just don't even know. They don't even care about the different tastes of food. So they're eating these like weird little fake bread or like a fake pudding, and they're just trying to learn how to eat with a fork and a spoon that doesn't make sense to them. And they have a million questions about forks and why people use forks. And then, so it's like very, very detailed and very, very slow process learning, is a lot of what's going on here. So there's um, there's a lot of categories when it comes to the types of things that these abductees are meant to help the hybrids learn about. Everything from carpets and floors, computers, other tech, Christmas tree lights, extension cords, cats, relationships, dressing appropriately, cabinets, telephones, TV, religion, travel. There's, you know, it's a lot of just answering questions and trying to, they are presented with like, a row of hybrids, and those hybrids are all trying to put on clothes, and they don't even know how to put a shirt on themselves, and the humans have to like help them pick out these clothes out of these bins and pick out appropriate stuff. And sometimes it's really weird, almost like a vintage shoe that nobody wears anymore, and they're like, no, you're definitely going to stand out if you wear that. So it all sounds kind of silly, but these are the stories. So you can read all these transcripts. They're very detailed and very kind of monotonous. That's what's in this book. And so it's funny because I've heard Richard Dolan talk about this before, where it's like, yes, there's this possible hybridization program, and these beings have these advanced technologies, and they have these crazy capabilities when it comes to mind control and being able to just abduct humans and do all this scientific research on them, and this weird like take harvesting of the eggs and sperm and implanting fetuses and then extracting the fetuses after 9 or 10 weeks. But at the end of the day, these hybrids do not seem that smart. Like, they don't feel very threatening when they can't even figure out the first thing about how to integrate with human culture. And if they're trying to take over the earth by slowly seeding themselves into our culture, it just doesn't feel, at least to me, it's like that doesn't feel that threatening. It just feels kind of funny. And like, I guess, I don't know, like I would want to help them kind of. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but like when I think about these poor beings that are just trying to learn how to exist, and they're, for whatever reason, they're being plopped into our society according to these stories, you kind of just feel like sorry for them in a way. So one of the things that Jacob says is that a lot of these hubrid hybrids, or whatever, the ones that are very human-like, are being brought to Earth at around the age of 17 to 25, and they're being placed in apartments with like 2 to 4 of them living. Usually, sometimes there's an abductee who's been kind of groomed to be their like earthly human contact and help take care of them, or help to kind of train them more once they come into our society. And when they're kids, when they're just little kids, because a lot of these hybrids are kids and the abductees are working with children, it's like they're really smart in a way. They have these like computer-like minds that seem to be able to access vast amounts of information, and they, when they learn something, they are able to just like know it from that point on. So that's why these question cascades happen, because they're kind of getting that information and then integrating it. But there's just so many things that they have to learn. It's almost never ending. But they did talk about how some of these hybrid children are brought down to Earth once in a while for short visits where they bring them to like a park or a mall, and they don't like to go to places that they can't easily leave, but they go to these places where they try to like have interactions with other people. So of course that makes my imagination run wild. I'm like, wow, I wonder if we've ever met hybrids or seen hybrids out in the world, or like, it's kind of like when people who are into the simulation type theories talk about the NPCs, and you kind of wonder like, oh, I wonder if I've ever met one, you know? These are things we can maybe never know the answer to, but it's interesting to think about. So anyway, in this book you have, like I said, all these detailed accounts based on these hypnotic regression sessions, and it's almost comical. It's like it's a little bit intense just going through the details of everything that they have to learn, but it doesn't feel so horrible. I think this book focuses on the abductees that are directly working with hybrids, and that's a little bit different than the work of other researchers that focuses more on the abductee experience, those who are actually undergoing this extraction of eggs and sperms that tends to be a little more traumatic for those people. So that's a little bit about David Jacobs and the work of David Jacobs. Oh, this is interesting. He does talk towards the end about special abductees, which are these abductees who tend to retain the telepathic abilities, and they are sort of being trained in all these different abilities like controlling objects, telekinesis, piloting UFOs, and crowd control. So they're supposed to work on controlling other humans, which that's a little weird and not happy sounding. And they work in tandem with hybrids, and then they're being trained to have neural control over other humans, and there's accounts of that. And yeah, based on his work, it just sounds like this is all about this process of integrating the alien DNA into the human DNA. And it does sound like these higher up alien beings on the craft early on in the book, they talk about like this is wonderful, these are the best of both worlds, this is a combination, you know, like they're very proud of what they're doing, it sounds like, and they try to convince the abductees that this is all very good, and these are, you know, don't these hybrids look great? Like, they don't call them hybrids, but they're like, don't they look great, don't they, you know? And there's this weird tone of like trying to convince everybody that like this is awesome, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who knows. So that's Walking Among Us. And to close it out today, I did revisit a Richard Dolan video from about a year ago where he asks some big questions. So we talked about it at the beginning, like how long have aliens really been here and what's really going on? And the coincidence of like the timing of our own species leveling up and becoming more powerful collectively, and this interest in us, I guess. Who knows what's really going on with that. And let's see if I missed anything from the Dolan interview. He talks about like the advancing technology and how there could be a future, like a kind of Minority Report future, where we're under much more surveillance. We're already starting to mess with like the human brain computer interface potential, and that's a little bit unnerving, but it seems like, I guess he's maybe hinting at the fact that there could be a correlation between some of these alien agendas and this advanced tech, in the sense that they are very interested in control. It seems like these groups that are specifically being discussed here today, They are interested in eradicating violence from the human species. They do not like how violent we are. They do not like how kind of chaotic we are. But also, it seems like they don't really understand or value like our culture. So that's kind of sad, I think, because I think we have a beautiful, interesting, and rich human culture all around the world. And anyway, this is again just a small subset of the whole picture of what's going on in the various beings that are being reported in the where is it? This, if I can pull it out from this stack. This little book is called The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, and I know they made a documentary of this, which I would like to see. And this is a collection of all the different types of extraterrestrials that have been reported over time and all the different stories. And I want to say there's like 76 or more. I wish it just said it somewhere on the back of this book, but there's a lot of them. So again, this is just, today we're just looking at one set of what people have claimed to have interacted with and the hierarchy, but this book has so many more. So we're going to get into some of the other, just the lore and like what has been reported through the stories. And I think that's probably good for today. So I do like this quote from Richard Dolan. He says about this alien topic, it's the single most important subject that is never discussed. Many people around the world believe there is something to it, and you would think there would be a much more concerted effort to understand what is going on, how long they have been here, etc. So I do think that's always, those of us that are into it, we're kind of like, why isn't everyone else interested in this? Why isn't everyone talking about this all the time? Why aren't we studying this more? Why isn't this out in the open more? And that's why I find it exciting whenever someone like Lou Elizondo comes forward, because Lou Elizondo is, self-proclaimed normal guy, military guy, has a family, wasn't looking for any of this, kind of just fell into it, and now his world is shaken and his worldview is shaken, and he's kind of trying to spread the word in the best way he knows how. And so I find that helpful for me because I want more people to talk about this. I want us to learn more about what is going on. I want us to be able to eliminate some of the nonsense and sift out some of the disinformation, and I want us to really be able to zoom in on like what is going on here and how can we look into it more. What ability do we have to look inside these UFOs or UAP? And right now the only ability we have is through the abductee, because there are no free will people going up on these craft. I mean, I guess there are some stories of that, but it doesn't seem like it's that easy for anyone to just go onto a craft if they want to. Even the people that claim to be making conscious contact, human initiated alien contact through protocols like CE5 and other processes are usually just making that contact and seeing things in the sky. They're not making contact and a being is coming out and talking to them, or they're going up on the craft. So we're just not at that level yet, I guess. But anyway, this is Lou's book again, Imminent, if anyone's interested. And thank you so much for checking out Shocks Talks today. Next time we will explore another body of work, probably a more positive one, maybe some Carolyn Corey. We'll see what I pull out from my stack of books, but I will be reading, listening to interviews, podcasts, and as always, the links are below. If you like this kind of thing, share it with a friend, subscribe, and you can hit the bell for notifications if you want to know when I post a new video. I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.